My entire family had a reunion without me. I found out later they were secretly changing a $2 million will to erase me from it. I was banned from my own family reunion so they could steal my $2 million inheritance. My family decided to ban me from our own reunion, operating under the delusion that they could get away with stealing my $2 million inheritance. It was a bold move, I'll give them that. They figured the family scapegoat, the designated black sheep, would just roll over and disappear without so much as a whimper. But they didn't know I was already one step ahead of them, watching their every move from the shadows they'd cast me into. They thought my silence was weakness. They were about to learn it was patience. That if you've ever been profoundly let down by the very people who were supposed to have your back, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to see how this story ends because this isn't just about revenge. It's about reclamation. In my family, the hierarchy was as clear and rigid as a caste system. At the absolute pinnacle were my Aunt Carol and her son Mark. They were the golden children, anointed from birth. Everything they touched turned to gold. Every story they told was captivating. Every success, no matter how minor, was cause for a family-wide celebration. And then there was me. I wasn't a problem child, not in the traditional sense. I didn't get into trouble or cause scenes. I was just quiet. I didn't play the social games, I didn't care for the gossip, and that made me an easy target. My quiet nature was reframed as being sullen, my independence as being aloof. I was the official family scapegoat, the convenient problem they could all point to when they needed to feel better about themselves. The only person who ever saw past that facade was my grandmother. She was my rock, my sanctuary. She understood that being quiet wasn't the same as being weak. She saw strength in my observant nature. So when she passed away, it felt like my entire world lost its color and went gray. The day we all gathered for the will reading was an exercise in controlled chaos. The air in the lawyer's stuffy office was so thick with greed you could practically taste it. Aunt Carol and Mark were sitting front and center, dressed in performative mourning clothes but unable to hide the smug little smiles playing on their lips. I could almost see the thought bubbles above their heads, filled with images of new summer homes and European vacations. When the lawyer finally cleared his throat and began to read, a tense hush fell over the room. He droned on through the minor bequests, a piece of jewelry here, a small sum there. Then he got to the main event. He announced that my grandmother had left the bulk of her assets, a portfolio of stocks and properties worth just over $2 million. Entirely to me. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't quiet, it was loud. It was a physical force that pressed in on all sides. You could literally feel the mood in the room curdle. Aunt Carol's smile didn't just fade. It looked like it was frozen in ice and then shattered right off her face. Mark, who always had a comeback, just stared a hole in the floor, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. The whispers started immediately, little venomous hisses in the corners of the room as people filed out. On my way to the door, I heard Aunt Carol mutter to another relative, loud enough for me to hear, "Well, we'll obviously have to help her manage that. Bless her heart, she can't possibly handle it alone." The narrative was already being written. A few days later, the campaign began in earnest. Mark called, his voice dripping with a thick, fake concern that made my skin crawl. "Hey," he began, "Dad and I were just talking. $2 million is a lot of money. An overwhelming amount. We're just worried you'll blow through it if you're not careful." The story was set and they were sticking to it. I was too unstable, too emotional, too much of a mess to be trusted with my own inheritance. They weren't just questioning my judgment. They were trying to construct a reality where I had none. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday afternoon. Our annual family reunion was just a few weeks away. This year, it was set to be held at Aunt Carol's new ostentatious lake house. A house I was starting to suspect was bought with an advance on my money. My phone buzzed and Mark's name flashed on the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some instinct told me to answer. "Hey," he said, his voice so sickly sweet it sounded like poison coated in sugar. "So, about the reunion, a few of us were talking and we just think it might be better for everyone if you sat this one out this year." The words hung in the air and for a second I was so stunned I couldn't form a response. "What are you talking about?" I finally managed to ask, my own voice sounding distant. He just mumbled something about avoiding drama and keeping the peace. "You know how you can make people uncomfortable," he said as if it were a universal fact. "It's for the best." He hung up before I could even process the sheer audacity of it. This wasn't just a disinvitation. This was a formal act of excommunication. For weeks, that hurt was a physical weight on my chest. It was all I could feel. They had successfully painted me as the villain of my own story and then kicked me out so they wouldn't have to look at their own reflections. I felt smeared, isolated, and completely, utterly alone. The gaslighting had been so effective that for a moment I almost believed them. But after the initial wave of pain wore off, something else started to creep in. A cold, hard suspicion. The timing was just too perfect. The excuse was way too flimsy. Why were they so desperate to have me gone? What were they planning that required my complete absence? That's when I decided to check something. Years ago, for my 18th birthday, my grandmother had set up a joint savings account for us. It was her way of teaching me about money. After she passed, I had moved some of the initial inheritance money into it for easy access while the larger estate was being settled. With a knot forming in my stomach, I tried to log in online. Access denied. I tried again. Access denied. My heart started hammering in my chest. I called the bank. After 20 excruciating minutes on hold, listening to cheerful, tinny music, a nervous-sounding clerk picked up. I explained the situation and he put me on hold again. When he came back, his voice was even more strained. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but according to our records, a change of ownership form was filed last week. Your name has been removed from the account." The blood just drained from my face. The world tilted on its axis. It finally clicked, all the pieces snapping into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't overblown family drama. This was a planned, methodical attack. They banned me from the reunion to get me out of the way while they quietly, systematically stole everything my grandmother had ever wanted for me. The person they betrayed was the quiet, hurt scapegoat they had created. But that person was gone. In her place was someone they had never met, someone filled with a cold, clear fury. They had underestimated me my entire life, and they were about to find out how monumental of a mistake that was. They thought I'd just roll over and cry into my pillow. They were so wrong. My first move was to stop playing their game entirely. I refused to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. No angry phone calls, no dramatic text messages, no social media posts. I gave them nothing but silence. Instead, I spent 3 days locked in my apartment, fueled by coffee and rage, researching lawyers. I wasn't looking for a mediator. I was looking for a fighter. I found him on the 3rd day. A probate litigation lawyer whose online reviews consistently used words like shark, pitbull, and relentless. One review simply said, "He's the guy you hire when you want to burn it all to the ground." I booked a consultation immediately. When I sat in his polished office and told him the story he didn't see. Family drama. He saw a crime scene. He listened intently, his face unreadable, and when I finished, he leaned back in his expensive leather chair. "They're not just greedy," he said, a small, dangerous smile on his face. "They're sloppy." And so we started digging. We filed motions to force the estate's executor, a cousin of mine who was so far in Aunt Carol's pocket he was practically lint, to turn over every single document related to the estate. We subpoenaed bank records, property deeds, everything. While we waited for the system to churn, I went through my own personal archives. I compiled years of their condescending behavior. I saved every patronizing text from Mark about my spending habits. I saved every fake concerned voicemail from Aunt Carol talking about her desire to protect the family's assets. It was a mountain of evidence showcasing a long-term campaign of emotional manipulation. The first bombshell landed when the bank records arrived in a thick package at my lawyer's office. He called me in. There, on page after page, were the transfers. And on the main transfer request for the full $2 million, there was my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. It was a clumsy, almost childish forgery. The slant was wrong, the loop on the way. It was bizarre. They hadn't even bothered to trace it properly. They were so blinded by their arrogance, so confident I'd never see it, that they didn't even try to make it look real. But the real key, the thing that would blow the whole case wide open, came from my grandmother herself. One night, unable to sleep, I was going through a box of her old books she'd left me, just wanting to feel close to her. As I picked up her favorite novel, a thick, sealed envelope fell out. It was addressed to me in her familiar, elegant handwriting. My hands were trembling as I opened it. "My dearest," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it also likely means Carol and her boy have finally done something foolish. I always saw their greed even when I tried not to. Do not let them take what is rightfully yours. I trust you to be strong." Tucked inside the letter was a small, unassuming key. The letter instructed me that it was for a safe deposit box. Inside that box, my grandmother had left me a treasure trove. It held the original notarized will, a copy of which the executor had apparently misplaced. And beneath that was a personal diary from her last year, detailing every single time Aunt Carol pressured her for money, every lie Mark told her, every attempt they made to have her change the will. My grandmother hadn't just left me an inheritance. She'd left me a weapon. I took the diary and the key straight to my lawyer's office the next morning. He read through the diary entries, his expression growing grimmer with each page. He looked up at me, the wry shark smile gone, replaced by something much more serious. "This isn't just theft anymore," he said quietly. This is evidence of felony forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and potential elder financial abuse. We're going to the police. We spent the next day putting everything together into a neat, undeniable package. The forged transfer documents, the bank statements showing where the money went, photocopies of the most damning pages from Grandma's diary, and a sworn affidavit from me. We walked into the city police headquarters and filed a formal police report. A detective from the Financial Crimes Unit was assigned the case. A no-nonsense woman who looked at our evidence binder and assured us it was one of the strongest cases she'd seen. And then came the hardest part. We waited. On my lawyer's advice, I went completely dark. I changed my phone number. I deactivated my social media. I was a ghost. My absence, which they had demanded, was now being used against them. Meanwhile, through the grapevine of a few distant neutral relatives, I heard about their exploits. On social media they were living large. Aunt Carol was posting a whole album of her expensive kitchen renovation, complete with imported marble countertops. Mark was showing off a brand new luxury SUV, posing in front of it with a smug grin. They were spending my money, celebrating their big win, all while a legal and criminal trap was slowly, silently tightening around them. They thought my silence was weakness, that I'd accepted my fate as the family loser. They had no idea I was just letting them walk themselves straight into the lion's den. The day of the family reunion finally arrived. The day I was explicitly banned from. I imagined them all gathering at the lake house. The upbeat music playing, the smell of grilled food, the sound of their laughter as they made smug toasts to family and togetherness. I could almost hear them talking about poor, unstable me, the girl who just couldn't handle things, and wasn't it for the best that she wasn't here to bring down the mood? But I wasn't at their party. I was at home sitting in my quiet living room just staring at my phone. The hours ticked by. 1 p.m. 2 p.m. 3 p.m. At exactly 3:15 p.m., a text from my lawyer came through. My heart leaped into my throat. The message had only 2 words: "It's done." You see, my revenge wasn't going to be a dramatic screaming match at the party. It was about cold, hard, inescapable consequences. I had coordinated everything with the detective. They knew about the reunion. They knew everyone would be there, providing the perfect audience. A distant cousin who had always stayed out of the drama and who I had kept in the loop, called me later that evening. Her voice was shaking with a mixture of shock and awe. She said that right as Aunt Carol was bringing out a giant cake, 2 unmarked police cruisers rolled slowly up the long gravel driveway. The music faltered and stopped. Everyone just turned and watched as 2 detectives got out, walked onto the patio and calmly asked for Carol and Mark. My aunt, true to form, apparently went on the attack, shouting about it being private property and demanding to know what this was about, calling it all a huge misunderstanding. But the detectives weren't there to argue. They had arrest warrants. My cousin described the collective, audible gasp of the entire family as the detectives put my aunt in handcuffs. Mark just went ghost white, all the swagger draining from him in an instant, and put his hands behind his back without a word. They were walked right past the stunned, staring faces of the same family members who had all silently agreed to ban me. The party was officially over. Just before they put a shrieking Aunt Carol into the back of the car, my cousin heard one of the detectives say, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Ma'am, the charges are felony forgery and grand theft. You banned your niece from a family reunion so you could steal her inheritance." The fallout was nothing short of epic. Faced with a mountain of undeniable evidence, especially my grandmother's diary and the laughably bad forgery, Carol and Mark's lawyer advised them to take a deal. They pled guilty to multiple felonies to avoid a much longer prison sentence. They ended up with 5 years of probation, a permanent felony record, and a court order to pay back every single cent of the $2 million with interest. They had to sell the new lake house, the luxury SUV was repossessed, and they had to drain their retirement accounts to begin making the restitution payments. Overnight, they went from being the family's revered golden children to disgraced, convicted criminals. In the weeks that followed, a few relatives actually had the nerve to call me. They didn't apologize. They begged me to have mercy and not ruin the family, as if I were the one who had done this. I didn't argue. I didn't engage. I just blocked their numbers one by one. As far as I was concerned, they broke the family the moment they chose greed over loyalty. I just held up the mirror. I eventually got my full inheritance back. But the real win wasn't the money. The money was just paper. The real victory was proving them and a small part of myself wrong. I wasn't the weak, unstable scapegoat they had manufactured. I was my grandmother's granddaughter, strong, resilient, and capable. I might have lost the comforting illusion of a family, but I found my self-respect in the wreckage. And sometimes justice is the only closure you truly need. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have gone for quiet justice or a public spectacle? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories where the right person always gets the last laugh. Share, comment, and like. Also remember to let us know where you are watching from and what time it is there.